So I'm just in my hotel room in an airport hotel near Narita Airport in Tokyo, and I just thought I'd make a shortish video reflecting on this wonderful trip I've been able to have in Japan, and really look back at it from not only the perspective of a historian. Well, I'm a historian of ancient Greece, but I can say I'm interested in other countries' history too. But also as someone who's been practicing meditation in the Buddhist style for really the last 20 years or so. And, traveling around all these Buddhist temples is partly a result of that, as well as my interest in history. And I guess I came to Buddhism as a teenager, as someone in the West who was really falling out of love with Christianity, really for only one reason in my case, which was that I couldn't believe it. It's the only thing that I thought was wrong with it, was that it was incredible. I didn't believe the traditional narrative about Jesus working miracles and rising from the dead and so on and so forth. So, like a lot of Westerners, I went and searched for a more rational and empirical religion, and I thought I would find it in Buddhism. And so it's always interesting to me to go to Asian countries and see the Buddhism that's actually practiced here, or that is traditionally practiced here, and remember how many religious aspects it has. We might almost say superstitious aspects. So fortune-telling at the temple, and praying rather than meditating, and so on and so forth. And I've had a very interesting journey. I started at Sensoji, the most visited religious site in the world, according to its own information boards. And that has quite a large area where you can get your fortune told, or you can read your own fortune by choosing it from a little shelf. And there's a Shinto shrine next to that too, where there's lots of praying to the local spirits, because of course in Japan, the Shinto religion of local spirits, kami, which has a nationalist bent, and Buddhism are never really cleanly separable. I mean, they tried to separate them in the Meiji Restoration. They tried to say Shinto shrines over there, Buddhist temples over here, but it was hard to do, and a lot of these sites are right next to one another even today. So these two practices kind of blend into one another. And, Japanese Buddhism, like most other types of Buddhism in the world, it isn't completely innocent. It isn't completely devoid of local spirits, bodhisattvas. It's not just about the Buddha as a human who reached enlightenment. It has these more religious elements in the traditional sense of, the worship or tending to of supernatural beings. So I guess I had a pretty typical Western experience of encountering Asian Buddhism in Nagano, because I really had a wonderful experience in Nagano with the temple stay, and then getting up at 6 a.m. to walk through the temple with the snow falling, and be able to not take part, but to observe this incredible ceremony in the morning. One of the most interesting and ornate religious ceremonies I've ever had the honor of witnessing. Lots of beautiful chanting, lots of monks wearing ornate robes, priests facing away from the congregation, almost like a pre-Vatican II Catholic Mass, facing the altars, and just a beautiful scene, doing various gestures I hadn't seen before, including a kind of windmill gesture with their arms, and just taking the beauty of that, and I guess the exoticism still too. And then, of course, being told by the guide that this is the school of Shin Buddhism, and they practice the Nembutsu. They say Namu Amida Butsu. They repeat that mantra. And of course, that's when I get a little bit disappointed, because I think, oh, you're just repeating a mantra. And I find out, oh, the belief there is that if you repeat that mantra, you're going to go to the Pure Land. Or I think in some schools, it's more you're reciting the mantra because you've already been selected to go to the Pure Land, as you're assured by the tradition. And so you want to be the kind of person who recites the mantra, because that's a sign that you're already foreordained or preordained to go to the Pure Land. And actually, there were frescoes above one of the main bits of the temple depicting the Pure Land, the heaven in that tradition of Buddhism. So that kind of makes me disappointed, right? Because I want this rational religion where people aren't engaging in activity in order to go to heaven, or in order to go to hell, or to avoid going to hell, sorry. And there's actually a really interesting ceremony they guide the tourists in, where you go under the main part of the temple into a pitch black tunnel, and you're really guided to touch this key, which apparently will get you into heaven. So again, something that I guess with my very Protestant background we would have called superstition in the old days. But yeah, beautiful experience. And then on to Fukui, where I went to Heiji, which has always been a dream of mine since I started hearing about Eihei Dogen. It has a big presence in Zen to this day, including Western Zen. And that's really Dogen's temple. And I can't really exaggerate how happy I felt when I was there. I mean, that's the word. I was going to say pleasant, but I really had this feeling of happiness just stemming from the beauty and the peace of the place. And it was really interesting then to see this video that the temple had made for guests, for tourists, both Japanese and English, in Japanese with subtitles. And they were really kind of boasting, I suppose, like a lot of institutions do when they make videos about themselves. And they're saying, oh, Zen has actually spread to the West. And Steve Jobs, of course, the famous founder, founder and CEO for many years of Apple, was a Zen Buddhist, and when he was dying of cancer, apparently he wanted to come to Eihei. I don't know if he actually did. But he obviously felt the same way as me, that this was a place of really surpassing beauty that would kind of make him feel a sense of joy. And I did feel that sense of joy. And I was even more touched when, in this video, they started to say, as I've mentioned, oh, Zen Buddhism is spread outside of Japan. It's being taken up in the West. And what did they use for the example of that was California, where actually I went to my PhD and where I got increasingly into Zen in particular, as opposed to just the kind of nondescript, non-denominational Buddhist meditation I'd been practicing on my own, largely previous to that. So I found that very touching. It was almost like a reflection of my own journey in reverse. You know, they were saying they were going from Eihei and going to California, whereas I'd really started out in Zen in California and then came to Eihei. But there as well, in the video, I sort of had a bit of a come down because they had some really interesting video of some of the very traditional things that they do at Eihei. They the monks tie themselves up in certain ways in sleeping bags when they sleep, apparently, in order to keep a correct sleeping posture. And they also had a video of Dharma combat. When a young monk reaches a certain level, he has to defend himself. And I've actually witnessed these in the Zen group I'm in California, where we do it, I guess, with a bit of irony and a bit of humor. Not out of disrespect, I think, but just because it seems kind of artificial to us as Westerners, I suppose. And the video, the Dharma combat they did at Eihei, I have to say, I think it was beautiful. I think it obviously reflected a very rich tradition, but it was very stylized, right? And these monks were kind of repeating these phrases of the sort that you'll read in the traditional commentaries on koans, the traditional classical works about koan study at places like Eihei. And, they weren't really asking questions, right? It was meant to be kind of a Q&A, but they weren't really, to my mind, I have to say, they weren't really asking sincere questions about meditation. They were engaging in a sort of stylized ritual. And I think that's beautiful culturally, but I guess as a sort of skeptical Westerner, I like the question. I like the questioning, and I like the idea that there are genuine questions that people might have, and that this might be debated openly and genuinely in some kind of context like that. But I don't think that the Dharma combat at Eihei, as traditionally practiced, and apparently as it's still practiced, is really the place for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the impression I get. And in the video, they actually talked to some of the younger monks, and they were also saying things like, I think it is good that people have strict rules to follow. And that's very interesting. It's, for me, a sign of conservatism, maybe, and there's a lot to respect in that. A lot of people have that worldview. But again, I'm not sure if it was about Buddhism. It wasn't necessarily about, progressing spiritually, whatever that means. It wasn't necessarily about becoming a better meditator. It wasn't even necessarily about charity or anything like that. It was just, this man obviously felt that rules were important. To me, that's a separate thing than religion or spirituality. So, yeah. So again, I have this sort of come down, I meet the Japanese tradition. I think it's beautiful and wonderful, but I also think it's not quite what I'd be interested in spending more time on. And then to Kamakura for the last few days, and I had a really interesting conversation with Cody Ellingham, a Kiwi podcaster who I really met, I guess, through free speech stuff, and also through Bitcoin. He's a great Bitcoiner. but who's now very interested in religion too. He's sort of rediscovered his Christian faith, so we had a lot of interesting conversations about that, one of which was recorded for a podcast, so that should be coming out soon. And and just to wander around more beautiful temples in Kamakura, in Gakuji. I can't even remember the names of them all, but there's so many, so beautiful, even the minor ones, or sometimes especially the smaller ones. But the larger ones just have these beautiful gardens. I mean, the use of the red leaves of the Japanese maple, it's a wonderful aesthetic experience and a historical experience too. Because a lot of these temples were founded in the 13th century, even if most of the buildings, because they're mostly built in wood, they burnt down a lot. So most of the buildings are really only from the 18th century. But that's still pretty good if you come from a place like Canada or New Zealand. So yeah, in Kamakura, I toured the temples, talked to Cody about religion, and I practiced a bit. I went to the Sanon Zendo, which is run by the Sanbo Kyodan. And that was actually the place where my teacher in San Francisco, David Weinstein, studied for many years with Yamada Roshi, the father. Now it's Yamada Roshi, the son, who's leading that group, who's the teacher. And I just sat 2 hours a day. They meet every day for 2 hours, so I sat with them, and they were generous to open the Zendo to me and let me do that. I'd been there once before for a one-day event, Zazen Kai, where there were lots of people, and this time I got the impression more that the daily sit is, a smallish group of dedicated practitioners. It seems like about half of that group is Japanese, and the other half is international, shall we say? A lot of Germans, a lot of Americans. But anyway, it was a nice group of people, and that was nice to do. And I was a bit more comfortable with that, to be honest, because I think that's very much an organization that's dedicated to lay practice. Rather than you shave your head and become a monk, it's more, yes, they do sesshin. They do quite a lot of meditating. 2 hours a day is quite a lot by any standards. But, the people have their jobs. I'm told that a lot of the Japanese acolytes of Sanbo Kyoden are kind of salarymen, really. They work for big companies, and then they come for a week and they do sesshin in the actual Zendo. They do everything there. They eat. They do oryoki, traditional Zen eating. And they sleep there as well, apparently. I haven't done it yet. Hopefully I'll be able to come back and do it at some point, even though it sounds a little bit painful for me. My 2 meters long body, I don't know if I'd fit in that space, but yeah, I probably would. But anyway, I'm not necessarily saying, Sanbo Kyoden is the way everyone has to join or something, but I guess I'm more comfortable in that environment where it's more international. It's not just the repetition of a tradition. There is a lot of tradition there, but it's important. But there's this attempt to do something a little bit different. Lay practice, what is that? And here I think, I was saying to Cody, I actually think there's a sense in which Western Buddhism is contributing something to world Buddhism at the moment that otherwise it would lack. And I think this is really an emphasis on lay people sitting. And usually when I go to Asia, it seems like people look at you a bit funny if you say you do a lot of meditating, because they often think, oh, that's what the monks do. And I've noticed in Thailand, you very much get that response. Here in Japan, I definitely have noticed more and more lay people are meditating. I've even seen in some of the more traditional temples, they have little spaces now and they encourage people to sit zazen. I'm not sure how long that's been going on. Yeah, I think that's one of the good things that's going to be brought to Buddhism by the West. And I hope also, and now I'm sort of even departing from the sphere of Buddhism, because I'm not even sure if I think Buddhism is true in every sense. And another thing I think the West can bring to it is a spirit of criticism and inquiry. And of course, that's not unique to the West now, but I think, the West in the early modern period, the scientific revolution really pioneered that and showed how far that could go and how much it could bring to the world in terms of progress and increase in prosperity and so on and so forth. Not the only things by any means in the world or the only important ingredients to a good life, but, important in their own way. And actually, even in terms of experience itself or philosophy or whatever Zen thinks it's doing, open inquiry and criticism are also very important there too. Also very important in terms of structures of groups, how groups get on, how you select leaders, how leaders are kept accountable and, prevented from being corrupted. I think all those things are important. I think that the Western way of thinking about those things, could contribute a lot to Buddhism and meditation and contemplation, whether this is in the Buddhist tradition, the sort of Hindu or neo-Hindu tradition, or increasingly now with Christian contemplation, which is sort of popping up, I think, partly as a response to the number of Westerners who become interested in Buddhist meditation. So yeah, I guess those are my reflections on that. I guess I ended my trip where I began in Tokyo, in the middle of Tokyo, Shibuya. A lot going on, amazing nightlife, a lot of hustle and bustle. And I think really, you leave these monasteries in places like Kamakura, even though Kamakura is quite close to Tokyo, they can feel, well, especially Eheiji, actually, that's a better example out in Fukui, in the outskirts of that smallish town. They can feel quite separate from everyday life. Of course, that's the point of a monastery. But I really think a lot of the action now will be with Buddhism, with a lot of the great religions, more and more to bring that contemplative, those contemplative techniques, that contemplative tradition to people where they are, the modern world. And yeah, we'll see how things go with that. But I think that's really the way that things need to go, I have to say personally. And I think traditions are beautiful, but they can also become a little bit desiccated. And yeah, I guess I should close just by saying I really just enjoyed this journey. It gave me lots of food for thought, and I am genuinely glad that these traditions and all their beauty and splendor really are still being maintained.